Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kim. Today I'm going to be doing my July wrap-up. So all in all, actually, over July I was pretty pleased with the books that I read. I ended up reading 6 books, or completing 6 books. The first book I read was when I attempted to do Becca's Bookopoly for her Bookopolathon, which is a readathon which is based around her TBR game where she plays Monopoly, but it's a book version, and where she dictates what kind of genre of books that she chooses from. I'll link it down below. It's a really fun game, I absolutely love it. And she did like a 24-hour readathon, no, 48-hour readathon, where every 12 hours she rolled the dice on her 2 versions of the game, so you could choose either prompt basically, but you would only find out them during the readathon, and it was really fun. The idea was to try and read 4 books, but there was no way I was going to do that. I read like 1 and a bit books. I ended up finishing the other book I read for the readathon like way down the line in July, so I'll talk about that a bit later, but I'm waving it around. But the book that I read and finished for that readathon was Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This I really liked. I really liked it a lot. It was pretty emotional actually, way more emotional than I thought it was going to be. Okay, so the premise is that there's this small cafe, it's been around for years, where there's one seat in the cafe where if you sit on it you can travel in time. There are a lot of rules that are attached to going back in time. So I'll just tell you a couple of the rules that there were. One was that you could only go back in time and visit people who had been into that cafe before. So you had to know that they'd been in that cafe, or you were out of luck basically, because how would you know when to go back? And the other thing is that whatever you do, you cannot change the present or the future. So lots of people kind of like, well, what is the point of even going back in time if you can't even change anything? But you can't do that at this cafe. So this book kind of follows 4 different storylines, but the characters within the 4 different storylines are kind of linked and woven together. They consist of people running the cafe and customers of the cafe. And yeah, you just kind of find out snippets of information about why these particular people want to go back in time, the ones that have chosen to go back in time, and what happens when they do go back in time. Loss was quite a big theme in this book, so it certainly makes you sad and like pulls on the heartstrings. Yeah, but I really liked it, and I think like actually thinking about time travel in the way that this book makes you think about it is really interesting. Like, it's a pretty quirky book, as you can probably imagine. I found like I was like upset and then I was laughing, and then, you know, it was a good time basically. I really enjoyed it. So I do highly recommend this one. Then the second book that I finished listening to was White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. So this was one of the books that Books with Shay set up for her Blackout Buddy read that she was doing back in June. I didn't manage to finish the 2 books in June, and I actually ended up putting White Rage down for now, just because it was very heavily American politics, and my knowledge of American politics is so low that I really found it hard to keep up to the audiobook. So I decided to put it down and then pick it up when I had like the text copy, so I could listen and read along with it and stop and pause and all of that. So because of that, I haven't watched Shay's live stream that she did for the readathon, but I will definitely watch it once I've read White Rage as well, so I have kind of the context for both. So I look forward to doing that. But White Fragility I listened to. So Robin DiAngelo is a white author, and she's basically speaking to white people and is kind of explaining quite plainly why she has found talking to white people about racism has been met with hostility and frustration and upset on the part of the white people that she's speaking to. Robin DiAngelo is someone who holds conferences, isn't the right word, seminars about racism within the workplace, and so she travels around a lot, going to different workplaces, teaching people about racism and teaching them to recognise systemic racism within the workplace, and what they can do to kind of help battle against it. And as she discusses in the book, she's met with a lot of criticism from white people that feel that she has come and is attacking them for things that they have done and what they have said. And she kind of talks about why she feels that that happens, and how reacting in that way just doesn't help anything, and you're basically, white people are twisting the story background to themselves. So DiAngelo kind of talks about how feeling like if you've been called a racist means equals you are an evil, terrible, white supremacist person is kind of gets in the way of white people accepting their own failures when they kind of partake in racism, in the general racism of society, which is so embedded that we really have to start recognizing that it's happening in order to dig it out. And so that means accepting that, you know, everybody is full of prejudice, even if it's automatic, even if you don't mean any harm by it. It's there, it exists, we're human, and we need to combat it because it is harmful. And I will say, like, recently, after the murder of George Floyd, I have had disagreements with some people that I know in my personal life, and I will be honest, like, I did lash out at those people when I saw things online about kind of denial about racism in our society, etc. And I didn't handle it in the best way, and I really feel for me, white fragility has kind of helped me begin to build up the tools in order to, and the vocabulary in order to talk to people about this and start having a discussion where actually we can have a meaningful discussion and I can explain things in a way where I'm not causing that person to completely shut down and just keep denying that there is a problem. So for that reason, I really found White Fragility was useful to me, and I'm glad I read it. So the third book that I finished in the month of July was Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Eddo-Lodge. And I picked this one up before White Rage purely because this is about racism in Britain, and obviously I'm from Britain. So I wanted to start here anyway, but I will definitely be picking up White Rage by Carol Anderson. Sorry, I don't think I mentioned that earlier. This book was written off the back of a blog post that Eddo-Lodge wrote about why she doesn't want to talk to white people anymore about racism. This book kind of covers quite a lot, actually. So I ended up reading this alongside my boyfriend at the same time, and I found that was really good because then we could both discuss things, and sometimes it's hard for me to understand things straight off the bat, so he did a good job at explaining things to me that I didn't really understand straight away. So in the first chapter of this book, she kind of discusses the history of racism within the UK, and she also talks about kind of the modern day racism that has happened. Stephen Lawrence, who was a young man who was murdered, and basically the investigation into his murder and who his murderers were, etc., just dragged on and on and on, and nobody seemed to be really caring, and it took 19 years for two out of 5 men that attacked Stephen Lawrence were actually arrested for murdering him, and it was just an absolute shambles and handled terribly. She also talks about just general systemic racism within the UK and how much harder it is for a person of colour, for a black person, to get a job in the UK, and to how kind of battered down they are when compared to white people. She talks about kind of how white children are taught not to see race in the UK and how that is harmful. There was a bit in this book where she talks about, I think it was, I wrote notes down. I think it was at the start of the chapter, What is White Privilege, which is chapter 3. And at the start of that chapter, she talks about when she was 4 years old and she asked her mother when she was going to be turning white because of the things she was watching on TV, where all the bad people were kind of black and brown people and all the great people were white. And, you know, it's that kind of unsaid racism that really feeds into especially young children's minds. She also discussed is kind of the damage of not acknowledging race and colour and that there's a problem, what damage that does cause. And it's not good enough to say I'm colourblind, I don't see colour, because number one, it's not true, and number two, you know, we have to see it because there are discrepancies between communities, which is very obvious. So there was a chapter actually on feminism which I found very interesting. In that chapter she talks about kind of how negatively bringing race into the question, into the feminist realm, has been taken by white women who say no, this isn't a place to talk about race, this is about feminism, when actually, you know, you have to kind of consider everything. And of course race and class has to be considered when you talk about feminism, and feminism has to include everybody and be accepting of everybody. We do have to acknowledge that being a black woman is a completely different experience to being a white woman in this world and in the UK. So that I found was a very, very interesting chapter as well, and, you know, makes me frustrated because why can't we just make space for people to talk about, you know, their own experiences? Like, we're, you know, if we want to all be individuals and spoken about as all individuals, then everybody should be given that right. Anyway, yeah, so all in all, I would recommend this book, especially if you're British, just to read a bit about our history that is not spoken about, and to kind of get more of an idea of the things that, you know, we can do to help fight against racism. So, you know, there are a few things that are spoken about in here that would help. First thing is, if you're financially able, is to kind of donate money to groups who are doing anti-racist work. Is kind of one way to help. The other way is to, if you see anything going on around you, is to speak up and speak out against racism within our society. If we see it at work and we see people being taken advantage of, people being overlooked in the workplace because of their race, then we need to speak up, obviously. And just the easiest one, maybe not the easiest one, is to talk to other white people about racism and really try and make it clear and try and make people understand that it is rife in society and it is not something that we have overcome, really, that we need to be acknowledging the fact that there is a problem. Then the fourth book I finished reading was Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, and I absolutely loved this book. Like, this was such a joy to read in some ways. It was like part joy to read and part really sad to read, because of events that happen. So Queenie is a black woman from South London, and we're basically following her life. So she's going through some quite difficult times at the moment, and she's going through a lot of self-doubt and a lot of, I don't want to say self-hatred, but definitely doesn't think much of herself. And we kind of follow the way that she's treated by the people around her, how she's completely, in my opinion, taken advantage of by certain men that she's comes into contact with. So this book kind of starts off with Queenie in a clinic with her auntie, and she finds something out that's very difficult to deal with, and she basically has to kind of deal with that on her own. I would say there's a lot of trigger warnings for this kind of story, so I'll try and write them down below. I might not get everything, but I will try and, or at least find a link to somewhere that states the trigger warnings clearly. But like I say, she's going through some difficult times and it's quite heartbreaking to read at some points. You're just following her life, and you're just following the way people treat her, how men treat her, how people in the sexual health clinic treat her, but also kind of you watch her as she deals with her mental health problems. So personally, like I think I've mentioned on this channel before, I have suffered with anxiety. I do suffer with anxiety. So I really felt that this gave great representation to what anxiety is and how it makes you feel, from my own perspective as well. I don't know if Candice Carty-Williams suffers with anxiety herself or not. I would imagine that she has, because it was such a great depiction of anxiety. You basically see everything spiral out of control. It spirals out of Queenie's grasp, and it's difficult for her to kind of bring herself back and build herself up. You see her relationships with her 3 female friends that she's very close to, and the different ways that they respond as her friends to the difficulties that she's going through. You see and hear about her relationships with her family. She comes from a Jamaican family, and you see how her family respond to her and the things that are happening to her as well. And then you see her work, and you see her boss and how she responds. Basically, you're just following her life, seeing how people are around her, seeing Queenie go through what she is going through. You just felt like you were literally just sneaking a peek into somebody else's life, and it was just really well written. I really, really enjoyed it. Yeah, I really highly recommend it. It's definitely feels very true to now. It feels like a proper contemporary. I mean, I don't read that many contemporaries, so I don't know if I can like say that in that other contemporaries aren't contemporaries. But what I mean by that is that this just feels so true to today, and like I say, I highly recommend. So the 5th book that I finished this month was the one that I started reading for Becca's Bookopoly, and that's Blonde Roots by Bernardine Evaristo. So this book imagines a world where, rather than Europeans going into Africa and enslaving Africans, it imagines it happened the other way around. So Africans come over to Europe and enslave Europeans. I'm going to be completely honest and just tell you that I felt really uncomfortable reading this book, and that was because, you know, I hadn't done huge amounts of research about the slave trade and what people went through and what actually happened and how people were captured and taken by boat to Europe and to the Caribbean and stuff like that. And so for me, reading about the things that happened and the atrocities that happened, especially like on the ships and, you know, obviously on the plantations and things like that, to find out particular details in a way where it was African people that were deemed the evil people, really made me feel uncomfortable, because I felt like this isn't how I should be finding out about this stuff. I know that that's on me, but like this book in general, kind of, yeah, you meet Doris, who's from this kind of, imagine like a middle-agey kind of Britain. I don't know if that's the right time period, but kind of, she lives on the farm and has kind of a very simple life. And she's got like three sisters that she has with her family, and then when they're playing one day, she gets taken, and you kind of follow along her life. She's not actually put on the plantations. She's kind of works for a very, very rich slave owner, rich and powerful slave owner, and you see a bit from his perspective as well. And then the story kind of unfolds and you see her and how she tries to leave the situation that she's in, etc, etc. I did feel like a lot of the things that happen in this book was very convenient, like meetings of people and things like that did feel a bit convenient and just kind of put the story together a bit too easily and a bit too smoothly. What I think this book does for white people, maybe in particular, is to really acknowledge properly what it means to... Obviously, we can all agree that slavery was just an absolute horrible thing, and treatment of human beings in that way is atrocious. But then even the other aspects that maybe are a bit less considered with horror as maybe they should be, which is being ripped out of your society, forced into someone else's world, and made to speak like them, dress like them, worship like them, and basically told that your society is completely wrong. Like, obviously, like, that is something that you do notice, but I think what this book does is really try to hammer home, like, how awful that is. Like, yes, it might not be kind of a violent thing, but obviously it's very harmful in a way that breaks down society and rips people away from their own world. And just because you think your way of thinking is absolutely superior doesn't mean that another way isn't just as good. And that by you condemning someone else's lifestyle and someone else's, someone else's culture, someone else's stories and someone else's life is, I forgot my train of thought, but I think this book does do a really good job of just being like, putting on a plate how awful it is to make someone change everything about their being. I can't say I enjoyed this book, but I did get something from it, and I feel like it's just given me the push to do more research. Sorry, this is actually a couple of days later. Basically, I'm in this tiny little box room and I was completely overheating talking through the last books that I read in July. So I had to like stop and get a glass of water and chill for a bit. So anyway, I thought I'd just pop back on and just let you know about the last book that I read in July, which was Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. And I'm not going to talk too long about this book because basically I think I want to do a bit of a longer discussion on factory farming and maybe read around some other areas of factory farming before I do that. But this book discusses factory farming in America. It was written 10 years ago, so, well, 2009 it came out, so it's 10 years old, but I would imagine things are still pretty much the same. Basically, Jonathan Safran Foer goes around and he speaks to factory farm workers, he speaks to family farm owners and workers, and he kind of compares the two, and he's basically trying to decide for himself whether or not he wants to become a full-time vegetarian or to still eat meat every now and then as long as it comes from an ethical source. His journey into investigating this area comes because he's about to have a child and he doesn't know if he wants to bring the child up on eating meat or not. This book is horrific. Like, when learning about what happens in factory farms is so disturbing and horrible, like absolutely horrible. The torture that animals are put through, the conditions that they're forced to live in is absolutely disgusting. And it's all for money, basically. And obviously as the population, the human population grows and grows and grows, and when countries like China and India are eating more and more meat, demand is becoming larger and larger, and we have to really think about the ways in which we farm animals if we want to continue to go down the road of eating animals, and whether or not it's sustainable or not. It talks about factory farming practices that happen within America, specifically to do with pigs and chickens and fish. He doesn't touch too much on cows, he does a little bit, but in Jonathan's opinion, factory farming for pigs and chickens is worse. So it gives you like a real insight into what goes on specifically with how the animals are treated. But also he talks about actually pandemics that come from factory farming, because those kind of environments breed disease, and things like swine flu, bird flu, etc. can jump across to humans and become very deadly, as we know. And also, as we know, pandemics are very undesirable and something we want to avoid. So it's a very serious issue when talking about how we farm animals and how disease is spread. He also talks about pollution from factory farming. He touches more on like local pollution, about the animal waste and going into water streams, and basically making areas surrounding factory farms very unlivable for poorer communities that are forced to live in those areas. The other interesting thing that I think Jonathan talks about is tradition and what eating meat means to us as human beings with regards to our culture and with regards to family meals, community meals, etc. Because for some people, eating meat has a lot more meaning to it than just I'm eating because it's tasty and I'm eating for calories or, you know, whatever. You know, he talks about the difficulties of the idea of giving up meat and giving up those traditions, you know, like he talks about, because it's an American book, he talks about Thanksgiving and what would it mean if you took turkey away from Thanksgiving? Would it actually take the meaning of Thanksgiving away or not? Do we need to kind of attach so much meaning to specific foods when we're talking about these holidays and stuff? I'll be totally honest, I've been vegetarian since I was 5. So for me reading this book, I have a very different perspective to perhaps a lot of other people who have eaten meat most of their lives, just purely because I don't have those emotional attachments to meat, and I don't associate meat with anything, you know, to do with Christmas or events or anything like that. But it was definitely very interesting for me to read, and it's something that I haven't really given too much thought or credit to. So yeah, anyway, like I said before, I'm really hoping that I'm going to talk more in depth about this. So if anyone has any book recommendations I can read about animal farming in the UK, that would be really great, because obviously this is in America, I'm in the UK, I'd like to know more about the specifics of what happens here, so I have a bit more of a well-rounded view of things. And obviously books about factory farming in other countries, or even works and essays on particular practices that could be alternative to factory farming and what we can do to really tackle this massive, massive problem that has the potential to be very damaging very quickly. So it's already very damaging now. I mean, imagine what it's going to be like in 50 years' time. So like I say, highly recommend. Not a nice read, but I feel like it is a necessary read. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching. That's everything that I read in July. I hope you guys had a really great reading month in July and that you're having a good August and you're not boiling too much in the 33-degree heat, which might not sound much for a lot of other places, but here is very hot. Yeah, so I look forward to chatting to you down in the comments, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.